In February 1992, a team of British detectives battered down the door of a nondescript house in Brighton. They were searching for evidence of a satanic cult. Tabloid headlines had been screaming about a diabolical group that allegedly conducted obscene rituals and even child abuse. The sensational claims were aimed at the Temple of Psychic Youth, or TOPY. For this video, we're gonna go ahead and call them TOPY. Now, this was not some silly group, even though the title sounds pretty funny. It was rather an underground network led by avant-garde musician and artist Genesis P-Orridge. By the time of the rage, P-Orridge, born Neil Megson, and partner Paula P-Orridge, had already fled England with their two children, effectively exiled by a modern-day witch hunt. What exactly was TOPY, though? And how did this experimental art collective become the target of a national moral panic? Well, we are going to unpack it all today. So sit back, relax, and take a deep breath. It's time to let the fresh air in. Hello, everyone. Welcome back, or welcome if you're new. My name is Erin, and I am fascinated by all things cult, true crime, and unique spiritual practices. I post one cult deep dive every Saturday morning, and I'm starting to integrate some true crime stories into my channel as well, starting in October. And also, I'm so excited to share that this video is sponsored by a brand new friend of the channel, ZocDoc. You know that feeling when you wake up sick or you realize you need to see a doctor fast, but the thought of calling around, waiting on hold, and being told that the next available appointment is 3 weeks from now, it just makes you want to give up. Look, I remember being sick after a vacation, and the stress of trying to find a doctor ASAP was enough to make me just give up. Like, I just want to go to sleep and I cannot keep doom scrolling for doctors. And not only that, but finding the right doctor or right specialist can be so exhausting. I put off my annual recently because after moving, it was so hard to find someone I thought I would feel comfortable with. And that's where ZocDoc comes in. With ZocDoc, you can find a doctor who takes your insurance, read real patient reviews, and book an appointment online, all in just a few clicks. You can fully vet several doctors and know that whoever you choose will be someone you can trust. No phone calls, no waiting on hold, no stress. And the best part? Many doctors on ZocDoc have appointments available as soon as today. Whether you're looking for a primary care doctor, a specialist, a dentist, or even an urgent care, ZocDoc makes it easy to take care of your health without all the hassle. It's like having a personal healthcare assistant in your pocket, from mental health to dentistry, eye care, skin care, and everything in between. When you've found the doctor you need, you can see their actual appointment openings. I remember when I got back from that vacation and I felt so sick to my stomach, I could barely even sit up without feeling sick. So it was so nice to be able to just lay my laptop on my lap and do a televisit with a doctor that very same day, order a prescription, and have my husband go pick it up. I mean, it was so quick and so easy. When you've found the doctor you need, you can see their actual appointment openings, choose a time that works for you, and instantly book a visit with just a few clicks. Plus, ZocDoc helps you get appointments fast, typically within just 24 to 72 hours of booking, and you can even score those same day appointments. There's no need to call doctor's offices and wait on hold either. ZocDoc lets you do everything online. So if you've been putting off that checkup or you're dealing with something that just can't wait, go to my link, ZocDoc.com/FreshAaron, and find the perfect doctor today. Don't delay. Click on my link in the description below to try out ZocDoc today. And thank you again to ZocDoc for sponsoring today's video. Genesis P-Orridge, born in 1950, emerged as a provocateur bent on shattering convention. In 1975, P-Orridge and collaborators, including performance artist Kosi Fanny Tutti, founded Throbbing Gristle, the pioneering industrial music band that combined abrasive noise with confrontational art. This doesn't sound real, guys, but it's real. Throbbing Gristle had evolved out of an earlier performance art collective called COUM Transmissions. COUM's infamous 1976 exhibit in London featured pornography and taboo materials and prompted a conservative MP to denounce the group as wreckers of civilization in Parliament. This badge of infamy, proudly embraced by P-Orridge, set the tone. Art was a weapon to attack society's hypocrisy and control systems. Throbbing Gristle, I just can't take that name seriously. Saying it out loud is a lot different than writing it. Throbbing Gristle disbanded in 1981, and Genesis P-Orridge sought a new vessel for their radical vision. Later that year, P-Orridge co-founded a new project called Psychick TV, together with musician Alex Ferguson. Psychick TV was conceived not just as a band, but as a multimedia experiment and occult commune. Its music initially drew from psychedelic rock and experimental sounds, but more importantly, Psychick TV was meant to be the artistic mouthpiece of a larger spiritual network P-Orridge envisioned. That network would become the Temple of Psychick Youth, spelled Thee, and of is spelled Ov, which, funnily enough, is how I nervously answered how do you spell of in a spelling bee when I was in third grade. And it was very, very traumatizing. And needless to say, I lost the spelling bee. In late 1981, Genesis P-Orridge, along with like-minded friends, formally launched the Temple of Psychick Youth, or TOPY, in London. Key early members included P-Orridge's wife, Paula, who had married Genesis in 1981 and performed on Psychick TV, as well as collaborators from the industrial and underground music scene. Notably, the founding circle overlapped with future members of experimental bands Coil and Current 93, who were at the time involved with Psychick TV. For example, John Balance of Coil and David Tibet of Current 93 participated in early Psychick TV/TOPY activities. The American artist Monta Kizaza, who had coined the term industrial music, was another associate who helped define the group's transgressive ethos. In effect, TOPY's birth was a fusion of the avant-garde art world, the industrial music culture, and, of course, underground occultism. Now, Genesis articulated TOPY's mission as an evolution of the disruptive mission that Throbbing Gristle had begun. While TG, Throbbing Gristle, tried to jolt people awake through shock tactics and anti-establishment noise, TOPY would go even further. It aimed to create change from the inside out, using the tools of magic and personal transformation. In P-Orridge's eyes, conventional political protest or punk rock rebellion were not enough to upend deep societal conditioning. Instead, TOPY would wage a war on ingrained belief systems by combining art, ritual, and the occult. This approach was sometimes called cultural engineering, deliberately using media and myth to alter culture at fundamental levels. From the outset, TOPY was an informal anti-cult as much as it was a cult. I think anything that says it's an anti-cult is actually a cult, even if you're like, I'm part of the anti-cult cult. Let's just all calm down. We don't need to make the word cult a pun because then that diminishes the true meaning of the word. Genesis P-Orridge later quipped that TOPY was conceived as an anti-cult cult, a network that adopted the trappings of a cult in order to subvert cultish group think. I think that we're getting into word salad territory here because this is all just a smorgasbord of nonsense. And indeed, the very name, the Temple of Psychick Youth, was a play on religious and mystical tropes. The deliberate archaic spellings, the THEE and OV, gave it this esoteric flair while hinting that this was not a traditional temple but a modern, tongue in cheek incarnation. In concrete terms, TOPY in the early 1980s operated as a loose collective centered around Genesis and Psychic TV. The group's base of operations was a communal house, because of course it is, first in Hackney, East London, where Psychic TV had a studio on Beck Road, and later in Brighton on England's south coast, where Genesis and Paula would move their family and opened their home to the temple's inner circle. So, living in communal fashion, this core group produced music, art, and literature that reflected their occult philosophy. Beyond London, TOPY began developing a network of acolytes internationally. By design, it was not a centralized church, but a decentralized federation of individuals and small cells. As early as 1982, the temple published an introductory pamphlet called An Introduction to the Temple of Psychic Youth, inviting participation from anywhere. Over the 1980s, official TOPY stations were established at various regions. There was one in the UK and Europe, one for North America, and one for Australia. Each station was semi autonomous and would coordinate with local adherents. For more granular reach, smaller local chapters called access points sprouted up in different cities. These cells allowed interested psychic youths to get involved by distributing the temple zines. I said it right, guys. I said it right. I first said zines and then I backed up and said zines. So, everyone who complained in my last video, you're welcome. They would also host meetups or rituals and would recruit their friends. Wow, great. Join my cult, bestie. Crucially, membership in TOPY was open ended. It was more of an affinity network than a strict initiatory order. There was no formal conversion process, but instead, potential members were self selecting, drawn by the literature or Psychic TV's output, so they could adopt TOPY's practices or connect with an access point to share ideas. In line with chaos magic's individualistic ideology, TOPY emphasized personal journey over top down dogma. As one temple text explained, there's no competitive hierarchy. Each individual must ultimately justify their every motive, action, and belief to themselves. We offer no dogma. We support your individuality. The temple would present itself as a catalyst and support system for one's self realization, rather than a traditional church with commandments and sacraments. Now, despite this non dogmatic stance they had and claiming to be an anti cult, they did develop recognizable iconography and structure that gave it a distinct identity. Because, of course, every cult does this. Every single cult is like, we're different. We're not a religion. We have no rules. But also, here are all of our rules. They're inferred. And if you don't follow them, we'll ostracize you. Or, great. Now, Porridge, with a showman's instinct, understood the power of branding, even in an anti establishment cult. As its emblem, TOPY adopted the psychic cross, a modified cross with 3 horizontal bars, often said to be in the 2:3:5 ratio. This logo, designed by Genesis P-Orridge, was intended to feel mysteriously familiar yet unique. Porridge later recounted, "We saw the need for a logo, a symbol. So I designed the psychic cross, a symbol that seems really familiar so that people could find it easy to adopt into their personal mythology. Because we're not like a religion, you guys. We are just an anti-cult cult, but we're going to use symbolism from another religion and then pull other symbols from other religions to make our own symbol for our non-religion." Okay. So the psychic cross soon became ubiquitous among TOPY members, appearing on stationery, art, and even worn as patches or jewelry. Likewise, the number 23 was adopted as the temple's sacred number, a numerological thread said to represent the interface of magic and reality. And of course, the number 23 already had a mythic resonance in occult and Discordian circles of the era, and it was associated with coincidence and chaos. So, to onlookers in the underground scene, by the mid 1980s, TOPY was clearly visible as a subcultural movement. Members often sported a certain look. Some wore uniforms of gray shirts and military style pants, accented with psychic cross patches and sometimes long braided rat tails of hair. Yeah, but they totally support your individuality, but you need to wear this uniform and braid your hair. Thanks so much. So this was like this quasi-militaristic, quasi-clerical style that was directly inspired by the Process Church of the Final Judgment, a 1960s occult sect whose Black Cape members had fascinated P-Orridge. So TOPY members adopted the rat tail haircut and even titles like Priest-S for core organizers in a tongue-in-cheek fashion, as if forming an army of spiritual guerrillas. They also communicated under pseudonyms. Frequently, male participants used the name Eden and females Kali, followed by some number or word, as a way to emphasize rebirth into a new identity and to keep mundane identities as secondary. Awesome. I'm really seeing how you're supporting individuality by basically making everybody strip the individuality that they came into the cult with and then renaming everybody. It's not like every other cult does this. Oh, right. They do. All of these elements, symbols, attire, aliases gave TOPY this aura of unity and secrecy, which is the exact effect that P-Orridge sought to intrigue recruits, but also worry the establishment. So by the late 1980s, the Temple of Psychic Youth had grown from a small art collective and into an international occult network with hundreds of active participants and thousands of enthusiasts. One internal figure put the number of TOPY followers at perhaps 10,000 worldwide by 1991. The temple had formal outposts across Europe, North America, and correspondence elsewhere, all communicating through literally snail mail, through the mail. They're all pen pals. This is just a pen pal club. It's just a fun pen pal club where everyone had a rat tail. Rat tails are one of the most disgusting, like, hairdos. I don't know why. If you have one, awesome. I bet you look cool. But for me, I'm just like, it's like mullets to me. I don't know why. For some reason, I'm like, ooh, when I see them. And I am someone who had several rats as pets at one point. It's not that I don't know why. They just give me the heebie-jeebies, I guess. So these pen pals, they exchanged newsletters, cryptic transmissions, sigil artwork, cassette tapes, and video cassette copies of psychic TV performances. And for a time, TOPY was successfully creating a kind of occult youth culture that paralleled the emerging global alternative music scene. Yet, from the beginning, tension existed between TOPY's anti authoritarian philosophy and the charismatic authority of Genesis. Genesis was undoubtedly the central figure and visionary driving the cult. Many members virtually worshiped as a guru, which is ironic given TOPY's claims to avoid guru worship. And critics would later argue that despite its rhetoric of individuality, this cult was centered around P-Orridge's personality, and it could be manipulative. These criticisms would gain traction in the 90s when things would begin to fall apart. But during the formative 1980s, Genesis's persona, which was part mystical prophet, part rock star provocateur, it was a magnet that drew creative rebels into the temple's orbit. It truly is giving Jared Leto. I covered his alleged cult in this video here. Now, the ethos of the Temple of Psychic Youth was rooted in occult philosophy, particularly the emergent current of the 70s and 80s known as chaos magic. Chaos magic was an anti dogmatic, results oriented approach to magic that had been pioneered by people like Peter J. Carroll and Ray Sherwin around 1978. Genesis and TOPY were greatly influenced by these ideas. In fact, TOPY can be seen as one of the first large scale social experiments in applying chaos magic principles to daily life and culture. Unlike traditional occult orders such as Aleister Crowley's OTO or the Golden Dawn, chaos magic rejects complex dogma and freely borrows from any spiritual system that works for the individual. Just like every cult, they just pick apart the different pieces of different religions they like and create their new thing. Topi embodied this ethos. It was deliberately individualistic in its magical practice. At its core, it preached that the liberation of the self from societal programming was the most important thing you could do. The temple taught that mainstream Western society, with its rigid norms and repressive institutions like church, state, family, and media, stifled the true potential of the human mind. Magic, defined as techniques to effect change in accordance with will, was the tool to break one's mental chains. In a Topi manifesto, the group proclaimed its aim as attaining a guiltless state of self awareness, free of external control. This meant that shedding guilt and fear imposed by religion, moral authorities, and what P-Orridge called consensus reality. Personal enlightenment to Topi was synonymous with psychological independence from these forces. And as you could probably guess, sexuality played a pivotal role in Topi's philosophy of self liberation. The temple placed a strong emphasis on what it termed guiltless sexuality or sex magic. Members were encouraged to explore their sexual desires without shame, viewing sexual energy as a potent fuel for magical work. The reasoning was that sex is an area where societal control bites the hardest through taboo and guilt. So, by reclaiming one's sexuality, one strikes at the heart of repression. I think it's also a tool so that this leader can probably just take advantage of all followers. That's what I'm anticipating here. Topi literature described the moment of orgasm as a doorway between the conscious and subconscious, a peak of energy that could be harnessed for spiritual or creative intent. This idea echoes long-standing occult notions of sex magic, which was practiced by figures like Aleister Crowley and various tantric traditions. But Topi presented it in a modern, non-mystified way that young people could experiment with privately. And look, I'm all for experimenting with what you like, but I think when there is a clear power dynamic and there is pressure to constantly be different than everyone else while simultaneously becoming similar to the people who are in your cult, there is this pressure to potentially do things that you wouldn't otherwise be comfortable doing. So I feel like it creates this environment where there is this unspoken pressure to do certain intimate things that you might otherwise not be interested in doing, but you feel like you have to experiment in order to achieve this ideal individuality and enlightenment that is so important to this group. But the signature practice that Topi became known for was the creation of sigils charged by sexual energy. Now, a sigil in chaos magic is the symbol crafted by the magician to represent a specific desire or intention, which is then implanted into the subconscious mind, often through an intense altered state, to try to bring about the desired outcome. Topi adopted this sigil technique very enthusiastically. They encouraged every member to perform a monthly ritual called the sigil on a specific day and time, the 23rd hour of the 23rd day of each month. And at that moment, adherents would focus on a single personal desire. They would create a sigil symbol, like writing and simplifying a phrase or drawing an abstract picture, and then they would charge it through an orgasm. So think of like okay, it's the full moon and I'm going to charge my crystals under the full moon so that they're ready for energy work. This is the same, except you're creating this symbol on your own. And I'm sure it could be an object as well. And you're calling it a sigil. And then in order to charge it, you're having an orgasm. There must have been a lot of pressure to have one in like 1 second if it has to be like the 23rd hour and the 23rd minute and the 23rd second on the 23rd day. It feels like a lot of pressure. Like, what if you're just not in the mood on the 23rd? You know what I mean? What if you're just not in the mood at 11 o'clock at night? For me, I would be in bed. Good night. Don't touch me. But this part, and if you're not into bodily secretions, just skip ahead a little bit because they would combine certain bodily fluids like semen or menstrual blood or saliva with the sigil. And this was called the three liquids. And it was one suggested method for empowerment. All you have to do is like have some period sex, spit on your sigil, and you're good to go. But like also once again, what if you're not on your cycle? I don't know. This just feels something about it's making me feel a little queasy. I don't know about you. I am uncomfortable. So then afterwards, participants would literally mail this little package of secretions with their little sigil, their little drawing, their little symbolic piece that reflects their desire. They would mail it to TOPY, the central address, where the group would then symbolically unite and amplify these bags of liquids. It just feels to me like Porridge was just a deviant and a creep, took pleasure in collecting bodily fluids. It's just, I don't like it. I don't like it. Now, they considered this act practical. It created a sense of community and a shared purpose, and it was magical because it was this notion of having a collection of an energy bank in one local place. Imagine like going into a new friend's house and they just have a room full of envelopes with a bunch of vials of liquids and pictures. I'd be like, something is wrong here. Something is wrong here. Now, what is up with the number 23? Well, TOPY considered 23 to be a synchronicity trigger. It was a number that appeared meaningfully and often to those who were attuned to it. Think of seeing angel numbers like 1111. And it reminded them of the malleability of reality. Quote, the number 23 is interwoven throughout TOPY, a number that occurs internationally, irrationally, and totally naturally. Like the psychic cross, 23 is the gateway, the crossover point to internal focus and development and external flowering, unquote. Thus, the 23rd hour on the 23rd day became a repeating rhythm for their work, a clever way to keep members engaged regularly in some kind of group activity or spirit, even if they were not in the same country. You might just get an angry letter from Porridge. I didn't get your semen this month. Where is it? Send it on over. You got to express mail it. You got to mail it internationally. Sorry. It's just, like I said, it's a lot different reading it out loud than writing it and researching it. When I was researching this, there were so many moments where my jaw just dropped at the absurdity. So, if that wasn't absurd enough, let's talk about some more rituals within this cult. So, since chaos magic values creativity over dogma, there wasn't a strict liturgy for temple members. Instead, the temple's canon consisted of a series of slim booklets and zines which offered suggestions and inspiration. Some of the notable texts produced by TOPY included the Gray Book, a foundational pamphlet outlining TOPY ideals and the monthly sigil ritual, the Black Book, dealing with psychic and magic techniques, the Sigilizer's Handbook, and later a periodic journal called Network News or Broadcast, which compiled letters, art, and essays from the TOPY community. These publications were often photocopied, hand assembled, and circulated via mail or at concerts. They mixed practical how to occult instructions with a collage aesthetic of radical slogans, occult symbols, and cut up texts. One recurring theme in the philosophy was the idea of deprogramming oneself from societal conditioning. How convenient that you're using the word deprogramming in your anti cult as a way to make people believe they're not being indoctrinated into a cult that they will then most likely have to deprogram from. It just is enraging. They would call this brain hacking. Influences here came from the writings of William S. Burroughs and Brian Geisen, the beat writers who pioneered cut up techniques and spoke of altering the reality film. Porridge had personal friendships with both of these men and absorbed their ideas about language and media as magical tools. Topi took seriously the notion that language, symbols, and even TV images can function as mind control from the powers that be, but that these same tools can be subverted for personal liberation. For example, a Topi member might be encouraged to practice Burroughs' style of cut ups of written texts, like rearranging words to break linear thought. All I'm thinking of are those like creepy serial killer letters where it's like pieces of a magazine that's being cut up, or to experiment with video collages to scramble the official signals of the television. The very name Psychic TV was chosen by P-Orridge to reflect this dual view of television, both the ultimate weapon of mass indoctrination and potentially a magical instrument that, if controlled by the counterculture academia, would make everybody's lives a lot better. Now, another concept that was central to this cult's practice was communal energy and shared myth. While everyone was urged to find their own magical path, the temple itself acted as a unifying mythos, a meta program, if you will, that bound the participants. Topi writings often refer to the temple as a living organism or group mind comprised of all members' energies. Some evocative lines from a temple document compare Topi to a quote, growing living organism whose form is a result of the collection of cells within it, unquote, explicitly likening each member to a cell in a larger body. The same text boldly asserts, quote, we may be small, but we are growing to attack like a cancer from within, unquote. So, such rhetoric of viral insurrection captures just how this cult saw itself, an infectious idea spreading through culture to undermine the status quo, rather than a mass movement marching openly. So, in summary, Topi's philosophy was a blend of the 60s counterculture values like personal freedom, sexual liberation, and anti authoritarianism, mixed with the 70s occult revival ideals like neo paganism and New Age self growth, combined with chaos magic theory. The belief was the technique, and art is the ritual. It was packaged in a confrontational post punk attitude that reveled in transgression, the deliberate violation of taboos, as a method to jolt oneself into a new awareness. Toby didn't merely theorize about these concepts, they attempted to live them, to create a micro society where these radical principles were the norm. This experiment in living mysticism would soon yield both innovative cultural products and serious controversies. From its inception, the Temple of Psychick Youth understood that controlling the narrative and reaching people's imaginations required mastery of media. In the analog of the 1980s, which means print, music, and video for all you youngins out there, Topi, via the Psychic TV and its publishing arms, became extremely prolific in producing materials that advanced the temple's message. These would range from underground magazines and mail art to records, live events, and even rumored brainwashing videotapes. This creative output was both an expression of the occult practice and a recruitment/publicity tool that spread Topi's influence across subcultures. One of the first things TOPY did was establish a means of communication through print. The group's mailing list and newsletter were active by 82. They sent out communiques, often called transmissions or updates, to members, and these would contain essays on philosophy, news of upcoming psychic TV releases, and cryptic art. They also created the Gray Book, a staple-bound booklet that served as the de facto handbook for new recruits, outlining the core practices like sigilization and the philosophy of deprogramming, or brainwashing, as if they're washing out the brain. But the beating heart of TOPY's media strategy was undoubtedly psychic TV. Genesis P-Orridge envisioned Psychick TV not just as a band to listen to, but as an ongoing, multi-sensory occult ritual that fans could participate in. Psychick TV concerts were often ritualistic happenings, complete with altars on stage, video projections of occult imagery, and spoken incantations. The band's lyrics and album art were laden with references to TOPY concepts, samples of Crowley's voice, invocations of occult figures, and exhortations to break free from control. In effect, Psychick TV functioned as the audio-visual propaganda unit of TOPY. In the words of one, its public performances and records were designed to attract curious outsiders and convert them into temple disciples. For example, someone might attend a Psychick TV gig for the music and find themselves intrigued by the psychic cross banners on stage, or by Genesis P-Orridge's cryptic pronouncements between songs about timing 23 or sigils. From there, they might pick up a TOPY pamphlet at the merch table and eventually start doing the practices, like jerking off into an envelope and sending it to the creepy leader. Many early temple members were indeed drawn in via the music scene in this very way. But one of Psychick TV's video experiments inadvertently became the group's downfall in the public eye. For years, it circulated semi-publicly with little fanfare outside the subculture. It was an edgy performance art piece with staged scenes of ritual abuse, self-mutilation, and sexual rites. But anyone in the know understood that it was a dramatization, not an actual satanic ceremony. However, in the fevered atmosphere of the early 90s, amid widespread fears of satanic ritual, this video would be disastrously reinterpreted by media and law enforcement. Now, by the turn of the 90s, the Temple of Psychick Youth had reached its zenith of complexity and arguably notoriety. Genesis P-Orridge was still at the helm, but the organization was evolving. The late 80s had brought new followers because TOPY decided to claim that they created acid, and so a bunch of new young followers decided, hey, I get to do drugs and jerk it? I'm gonna join this cult. But storm clouds were gathering both internally and externally. Internally, Genesis was growing weary of some aspects of TOPY, and some members were grumbling about direction. Externally, a dangerous social hysteria called the Satanic Panic was on the rise, and TOPY's occult transgressions were about to be caught in its crossfire. The first crack came from within. In 1991, Genesis made a surprise announcement. He was leaving the Temple of Psychick Youth and shutting it down. This was shocking to devotees since P-Orridge was the founder and figurehead. Accounts differ on exactly why he decided to break away, but one explanation is that by 91, he was 40 years old and had undergone personal changes, including exploring a new spiritual path influenced by Buddhism and also a romantic relationship that would bring to the US. Another practical factor was the mounting pressure and bad press in the UK, which might have made Genesis see TOPY as a liability. According to statements later made, P-Orridge felt TOPY had lost its intended spirit and become just another organization that people were clinging to. Apparently told colleagues that people were treating TOPY as a crutch. All he wanted was your bags of blood and semen, guys. You're really taking this too far. There may have also been some personal disputes or burnout from carrying the weight of the network for a decade, but in any case, Genesis declared TOPY finished. He requested that no one use the Psychic Cross logo or the name Temple of Psychick Youth officially anymore. And this was not a democratic decision, it was a unilateral one. Many within this group were dismayed and obviously did not agree. Notably, the network outside the UK, especially in North America and some parts of Europe, decided to ignore the shutdown order. These members felt that the temple was bigger than just one person and that they could continue the work without need be. And what ensued was a schism. Essentially, TOPY split into two camps: Genesis versus Loyalists. Genesis and those closest ceased TOPY operations and moved on, and Genesis soon involved in a new project, such as a quasi religious newsletter called The Process, which was an homage to the Process Church. And he floated ideas for a successor network under a slightly altered name, sometimes referred to as, guess what? TOPY. But TOPI, not TOPY. It's different, you guys. My new cult, it's totally different. But these projects, they remained pretty low key. But he also increasingly focused on personal art, and by the mid 90s, the Pandrogyny Body Modification Art Project with his new wife, Lady J. Breyer, would come onto the scene. There were also these independent TOPY cells. They would continue issuing newsletters, holding gatherings, and using the TOPY name and symbols, albeit a little more underground. Some evidence suggests that a TOPY group remained active in the late 90s, particularly in the US Pacific Northwest and parts of Europe. Over time, these morphed or dissipated as the internet emerged and people found new communities online. But essentially, this group didn't just vanish overnight because its leader left. It only decentralized further. The split was rather acrimonious. P-Orridge was reportedly unhappy that people kept his symbol and mission going without him, and the independent TOPY groups, on the other hand, felt betrayed by their teacher and bristled at his attempt to own the collective journey. In later writings, Genesis at times spoke as if TOPY had properly ended in 91, downplaying the other's continuation. Some remaining TOPY folks changed their approach, distancing from the P-Orridge idolatry and re-emphasizing chaos magic theory and practice. One vocal critic who emerged around this time was Dan Siepman, who by 2019 would label Genesis P-Orridge's TOPY as having denigrated into a cult of personality and a front for of power. Now, it's not clear if Siepman was himself an ex-member or an observer, but such criticism reflects sentiments that probably existed in the 90s as well among those who had been disillusioned. The gist was that TOPY started with noble anti-establishment goals, but that P-Orridge had used it to amass personal power and adoration, potentially exploiting young followers, devotion for ego gratification, or worse. Now, there were no concrete allegations of physical by P-Orridge within TOPY, but however, there have been accusations specifically that first wife in the 70s. However, the psychological hold and manipulation are elements frequently cited by those uneasy with Topy's legacy. Now, while internal fractures were happening in 91, the external world delivered the fatal blow to Topy's public existence in 1992. And this came in the form of a full-fledged media scandal linking the Temple of Psychick Youth to alleged satanic crimes. In the UK, a wave of fear swept through media and authorities about supposed networks of Satanists abusing children. There was never, ever solid evidence ever found for such networks, but sensationalized stories proliferated. Now, in this climate stepped a Channel 4 TV documentary titled Beyond Belief, aired on the investigative series Dispatches on the 19th of February in 1992. The program, led by journalist Andrew Boyd, claimed that it had uncovered real evidence of satanic ritual abuse in Britain. The evidence showcased was none other than the Psychick TV's first transmission video footage, but it was completely misconstrued. The program presented disturbing clips of the video, scenes of a hooded man apparently carving symbols into flesh, women bound and seemingly violated, a staged fetus removal, and flashing satanic pentagrams. They implied that these were actual rituals performed by a cult, not just part of a performance. The narration suggested that there was a cult involving young people and possibly minors that were enacting and sacrifices. And crucially, one expert interviewed speculated that a girl in the footage might be no more than 13 years old. So this was a claim that just further stoked horror. But in reality, everyone in that first transmission had been consenting adults or artists that were only simulating these acts as an art performance slash ritual. But the show dispatches did not provide any of that context. So almost immediately, mainstream newspapers ran with the story. The Observer and News of the World, a tabloid, published alarmist pieces about a video that shows satanic. They connected it by name to the Temple of Psychic Youth and Genesis P-Orridge, identifying him as the ringleader of this deviant cult. One headline blared Satanist and even insinuated infant sacrifices. No, you guys. All I'm doing is abusing my wife and collecting semen from my followers. It is not a big deal. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Notably, journalists quickly discovered the truth that the footage was not secret at all, but had been part of an avant-garde film program in the 80s and sold through TOPY's own mail order catalog. And although certain media outlets corrected their mistake, the damage had been done. And ironically, on the 23rd of February in 1992, police from Scotland Yard raided Genesis and Paula's P-Orridge home in Brighton at dawn. They used a sledgehammer to break in the door and conducted an extensive search and seizure operation. Genesis and Paula weren't there by pure chance. They were abroad volunteering at a charity in Kathmandu. But the police confiscated all the archives, the videos, the photographs, the writings, and presumably anything that looked suspicious. I think we know what they found. Now, given TOPY's output, one can imagine the haul included plenty of sensational-looking items like bloody ritual props, fetish photos, etc. But none of it was indicative of actual crimes. But to an untrained eye, it might have appeared very incriminating. Now, the timing of the raid was orchestrated such that Jen and Paula would have been home. They would have been caught, groggy, and unprepared. The police expected them to have just returned home from travel, very jet-lagged. But the fact that authorities coordinated with media is apparent. And the next day, the News of the World had reporters ready to splash the story. It later emerged that fundamentalist Christian groups had been lobbying against occultists and likely fed leads to both media and the police regarding TOPY. So it was a concerted witch hunt led by evangelicals. Now, advised by their lawyer that they risked arrest and even losing custody of their children if they ever returned to the UK, Genesis and Paula never went back. Instead, they diverted from Kathmandu to the United States, effectively making themselves exiles. They took refuge in California at the homes of different friends, and ironically, one of those friends turned out to be connected to psychologist Timothy Leary, who would later become the godfather to the P-Orridge children. Yeah, so I'm really sure that everybody was so excited that this cult had invented acid, and Timothy Leary was like, "You sure did, buddy. We should all do it." For whatever reason, the investigation in England just fizzled out. Cops were like, it's not a big deal. And no charges were brought because ultimately no crimes could be substantiated. However, the damage had been done. The media storm had effectively destroyed TOPY's public legitimacy. And amid sensational claims of Satanism and child, it became impossible for TOPY to continue operating openly. Now, what about those accusations by Paula? Well, she would find herself being a single mother in California, essentially starting from scratch with no career, suffering severe PTSD after the ordeal with her husband. But Genesis, on the other hand, resettled in New York and by mid-90s had re-emerged musically with a reformed psychic TV called PTV2 and other art projects. But TOPY, as a formal entity, was left behind. So though TOPY only formally existed for about a decade, its influence reverberated long after its dissolution. In assessing the, quote, legacy of the Temple of Psychick Youth, we find contributions in multiple domains: the evolution of occult practice, the development of underground culture, and even in academic and artistic understandings of the late 20th century counterculture. TOPY was a pioneer in bringing chaos magic to a wider youthful audience. Before TOPY, chaos magic was esoteric lore discussed in small occult circles. So, this cult's activities effectively popularized concepts like sigils, gnosis, and the idea that belief is malleable. Many who never even joined TOPY nonetheless picked up these techniques via music and zine culture. By the 2000s, elements of chaos magic had seeped into the mainstream occult revival. One could find teenagers on internet forums trading sigil making tips, much the same way that TOPY members did via mail in the 80s. A direct lineage can be drawn from TOPY to the modern DIY occult scene, which often rejects formal lodges in favor of personalized spirituality. The temple's emphasis on combining art, tech, and magic prefigured what came to be known as hypermedia occultism in the digital age. And contemporary witchcraft influencers who share spells on social media or artists who incorporate ritual into performance are inheritors of the path TOPY helped blaze, whether or not they even know it. Moreover, TOPY's collapse amid the Satanic Panic provided cautionary lessons to later occult groups about context and transparency. Many realized the importance of disclaimers and consent. For instance, modern occult performance artists often clarify that their extreme acts are symbolic to avoid misunderstandings. The satanic panic itself subsided by the late 90s, and in retrospect, TOPY is sometimes cited in scholarly works as a victim of that moral panic, alongside other wrongly accused parties. This has somewhat rehabilitated their image in occult communities, painting them as brave experimenters rather than dangerous culprits. But whether or not you yourself have come to that conclusion, I suppose it's in the eye of the beholder. So, what do you think? Is this a dangerous cult, or is it just a group of people who are coming together to share whatever their rituals are with each other? Are they a group of people that kind of just like things that are considered fringe? In my opinion, when you're controlling people's time, their energy, they're buying videos from you and pamphlets from you and kind of idolizing you, you've created a cult of personality. That's my opinion. And claiming that someone would do something that's inherently sexually exploitative, like everybody is going to have intercourse at the same time and then send me the results of that exchange, it's odd. It's creepy and it's very, very culty. But I'm really curious to hear about your opinions if you have any more knowledge that I do. And I hope you're really proud that I pronounced zine correctly. And I would also like to take this opportunity to once again thank our sponsor, ZocDoc. You can find the link down in the description below. And other than that, I hope you'll have an amazing rest of your weekend. Stay safe out there, ask questions, and always stay skeptical. I'll see you soon. Bye.